Hey everyone, and welcome back to our explainer on Class 10 Science. So in our last session, we spent a lot of time exploring the complex, amazing architecture of the human brain. But today we're talking about what happens when your brain is, well, just too slow to keep you safe. Picture this. You're hanging out in the kitchen, and you accidentally brush your hand against a scorching hot pan. Instantly, literally before you even realize it's burning you, your arm just yanks your hand away. It feels like magic, right? But it's not. It's biology.
I mean, really think about that moment. Did you stop, analyze the exact temperature of the pan, and then consciously decide, oh, I should probably move my hand now? No way. Or what about when you're at the doctor's office, they tap your knee with that little rubber hammer, and your leg just kicks up all on its own? Or when a gust of wind blows dust at your face and you blink instantly to clear it away? Okay, let's dive into this, because the reality is, these absolutely crucial actions happen in a fraction of a second, completely bypassing your conscious thought process.
So, to figure out how our bodies pull this off, we'll be covering 5 key areas today: the need for speed, defining stimulus and response, inside the reflex arc, spinal cord versus brain, and finally, some exam prep and review to get you ready for test day.
All right, kicking things off with Section 1, the need for speed.
We navigate a world full of potential dangers every single day. And honestly, sometimes taking the time to think is a luxury we just don't have. And that brings us to our core definition. A reflex action is a quick, automatic, and involuntary response to a stimulus without conscious thinking. The absolute key word here is involuntary. Your body basically executes an emergency protective maneuver on autopilot. It completely skips the slow, deliberate thinking process of your brain just to save you from getting hurt. And you experience these all the time. Pulling your hand from a hot object is the classic one we always talk about. But there's also blinking when dust flies into your eyes, or sudden sneezing, coughing when food goes down the wrong pipe, or that famous knee-jerk reflex during a medical exam. Every single one of these actions happens automatically. They're your body's built-in defense mechanisms.
Moving right along to Section 2, defining stimulus and response.
To really understand how a reflex works, we need to look at the basic biological cause and effect. First up is the trigger, which we technically call a stimulus. A stimulus is simply any change in the surroundings that causes a response. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is that these triggers are just everyday environmental shifts. It could be intense heat from a stove, a sudden flash of bright light, a loud sound, a sharp pain, or even an intense smell. Your nervous system is constantly scanning the environment for them.
And when it actually detects one of those shifts, well, we get a response. The response is simply the reaction shown by our body after receiving that stimulus. Returning to our hot pan example, the intense heat is the stimulus, and immediately pulling your hand away, that's the response. It's this perfect continuous cause and effect loop designed purely for your protection.
Which brings us to Section 3, inside the reflex arc.
Okay, this is where things get truly fascinating. Let's meet the unsung hero of today's explainer, the reflex arc. The reflex arc is the actual physical pathway that nerve impulses follow during a reflex action. Here's the secret. Instead of traveling all the way up your neck to the brain for processing, which takes time, the impulse is processed directly by the spinal cord. Taking this shortcut makes the response incredibly faster. We're talking about saving precious milliseconds that mean the difference between a minor close call and a severe burn.
Let's actually walk through this journey step by step, kind of like a relay race. Imagine you've just touched that hot pan. Step 1, a receptor in your skin detects the stimulus, the heat. Step 2, that signal is immediately picked up by a sensory neuron. Think of it like a biological emergency courier, carrying the nerve impulse straight to your spinal cord. Step 3, inside the spinal cord, which is acting as our body's first responder here, a relay neuron, sometimes called an interneuron, instantly connects the incoming warning path to an outgoing action path. Step 4, that outgoing path is the motor neuron, carrying the impulse away from the spinal cord directly down to your muscles. And finally, Step 5, the effector. Usually a muscle, the effector performs the actual physical action. Your arm muscle contracts, and boom, your hand pulls away.
So the crucial point is this exact flowchart right here. Stimulus to receptor, to sensory neuron, to spinal cord, to motor neuron, to effector, leading directly to the response. This sequence is absolutely vital to understand, and I highly recommend you memorize this for your board exams. It is literally the definitive map of how your body protects itself in a crisis.
All right, Section 4, spinal cord versus brain.
So it's time for a bit of a biological showdown.
Who controls our immediate reactions and who gets informed later? This brings up a massive question. Why doesn't the brain control reflex actions immediately? I mean, the brain is the CEO of the body, right? It's the master command center. But in a reflex action, the brain is essentially just CC'd on the emergency email after the action has already been taken. Why is that?
Well, let's compare a reflex action directly to a voluntary action to see exactly why. If you look at the nature of these actions, a reflex is automatic, while a voluntary action is something you perform consciously. The primary controller for a reflex is the spinal cord, whereas your brain controls voluntary choices. Because the brain isn't involved in that initial loop, a reflex is blindingly fast compared to the comparatively slower speed of voluntary, conscious thought. The whole purpose of a reflex is strictly protective. Think about it. If the brain had to pause, process the heat, decide that heat was dangerous, and then send a signal all the way back down to move your hand, you'd already be severely burned.
Now let's just quickly clear up a few common student doubts we often see. First, why do we blink automatically? It's simply to protect our extremely sensitive eyes from sudden dust or blinding bright light. Second, which organ mainly controls these reflex actions? As we've seen, it is the spinal cord, acting totally independently in a crisis. And lastly, can reflex actions really occur completely without the brain's immediate input? Yes, absolutely. The spinal cord handles the emergency, and the brain simply receives the incident report later. That's exactly why you pull your hand away first, and only a second later do you actually feel the pain and think, ouch, that was hot.
And finally, Section 5, Exam Prep and Review.
Let's pivot from the biological narrative for a second and get you perfectly prepped for test day. Here is your rapid-fire revision checklist. You need to know these key terms inside and out. Reflex action, stimulus, response, reflex arc, receptor, sensory neuron, relay neuron, motor neuron, effector. And this brilliantly illustrates just how much biological machinery works together in a fraction of a second. If you can confidently define each of these terms, you are going to be in fantastic shape.
So what should you actually sit down and study? Make sure you can confidently answer these essential board questions. Define a reflex action and give an example. Know what a reflex arc is and explain its pathway. Be able to differentiate between reflex and voluntary actions. Remember that table we looked at? Practice drawing and labeling the reflex arc flowchart. And finally, be able to clearly explain why the spinal cord is the one calling the shots in reflexes instead of the brain. To summarize our core takeaway for today, reflex actions are quick, automatic, and highly protective. Your evolutionary speed and your physical safety are perfectly prioritized by your nervous system. The spinal cord processes the nerve impulse right through that reflex arc shortcut, allowing your body to respond instantly to danger without ever waiting for the brain to catch up.
But before we go, I want to leave you with a bit of a provocative thought to ponder. If our spinal cord is so incredibly fast, efficient, and good at keeping us alive, what would happen if it just controlled all of our actions? Imagine a world without the slower, conscious, deliberate processing of the brain. It really makes you appreciate that perfect, delicate balance between our automatic survival instincts and our thoughtful, everyday choices. And that is all for today's explainer on control and coordination. Next time, we are going to shift gears entirely and explore how nature manages to coordinate itself without any nerves at all, as we dive into plant hormones and tropic movements. You won't want to miss it. See you then.